Okay, this episode is going to be called Fractured Gods. But before I jump into it, I have to start by saying, if you are listening on YouTube, thank you so much. I appreciate you. But the podcast is available on other platforms as well. You can find Your One Black Friend on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all of those. Overcast, Podbean, I'm everywhere. So in order to take in the information and not be, trapped on YouTube, I would implore you to seek out the podcast and subscribe on other platforms. Because if you're listening for the first time, these episodes tend to go a bit long. Say about an hour. If it's something that's really dense, probably an hour and a half, sometimes 2. And so I always encourage my listeners to please utilize the speed function. And essentially increase the speed, right? So YouTube allows you to listen at like 2x speed max. But the problem is that it also changes the vocal, so it's hard to understand. However, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and the like allow you to go, even Overcast allows you to go up to 3.5x speed and cut out, dead air, so you can just get the information. Because the reason why I'm saying this is because I don't want you guys to sort of be intimidated by the length of time. Although, comparatively speaking, there are other podcasts that go on for 3-4 hours. So perhaps, you can hang. I don't know. But if you want the information, but you want it in half the time, I would encourage you to utilize speed functions. There's another reason why I encourage this is because I want my listeners to also be readers. And in this day and age, we've fucked our brains up so much, myself included, with this swipe culture, infinite swipes. There's a book called The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. And it's basically saying that we are slowly losing our ability to focus on things for long periods of time, just causing our brains to change and to smooth out. So there is a concern that 5-10 years from now, with this, our daily habit of continuously just not really staying focused on one thing, even on TikTok, you just jump from one thing to another thing, what it's going to do to us as a society long term. So in the interest of saving your brains, I want you guys to read more. But a lot of people are finding it's harder and harder for people to sit and hold a book in their hand. So an alternative to that is, if you can listen to a podcast, you can listen to a book. Start listening to audiobooks, and not at normal speed. I encourage all my listeners, all my friends as well, and family, the ones who will listen, to increase the speed. Don't just listen at 1x speed. Listen at 1.5x. Listen at 2x speed. 3x eventually. You don't have to obviously listen that fast, but I listen that fast because I programmed myself over time to listen that fast and take in the information. But it also allows me to listen to one book 3 times in the same amount of time that it takes a regular person to listen to a book, assuming a regular person is sitting and listening to a book in one go, which most people aren't. So it's just a smarter, more efficient way of getting information into your mind and digesting it. And there's something about repetition. So in the podcast, when I speak, I tend to repeat myself, particularly in points that need to be, paid attention to. They say, psychologists have said, when you listen to something, listen to it 3 times. There's that 3 again. Listen to it 3 times, because the first time your brain is probably going to get distracted by something, right? So you'll catch bits of it. The second time you listen to it, your brain goes, oh, wait a minute, this feels familiar. I should pay attention. So then you'll catch some of the bits that you missed on your first listen. The third time you listen to something, all of a sudden your brain goes, okay, I'm paying attention and I've got the full picture, and then things start to make sense. Lately what I've been doing is, normally I listen to like a book, once, maybe twice, and I got the gist, but what I've been trying to do is restructure my brain. Because let's talk about technology. There are things that you need to understand that if you sort of allow technology to take over certain things for you, you also reduce your ability or diminish your mind's ability to do that thing. Case in point, I parked in the parking lot. I went to go visit a friend in the hospital. We parked in the parking lot, and as I was walking away from my car, I got a notification on my phone. I just downloaded Apple Maps. Typically, I don't use Apple Maps, but I did. So I just now downloaded it, and now it's like doing the most. I didn't ask it to do that, but I got a notification like telling me, "Oh, well, you remembered where you parked," and that annoyed me. And I turned it off. And the reason why is because I need to remember where I parked. So, like, imagine, like, at 35 years old, okay, like, assuming I live till 70. Yeah, 35 years of just allowing a machine to, like, remember certain things makes me less likely and more dependent on technology. It makes my brain that much weaker. Okay, does that make sense? So there was a time for, the millennials listening to this. Remember when phones first came out? Cell phones, and even before that, right? You knew everybody's phone number off the top of your head. You just knew, okay, who's calling? You didn't have to save caller ID, right? You just looked at the caller ID and you would go, oh, that's so-and-so. That's my mom. That's my dad. That's my neighbor. That's my best friend. That's my school. You knew this. Your brain recognized it. And then we gained the ability to save phone numbers, and now we've lost the ability to memorize more than a couple numbers at a time. That is a problem, right? So when you hand over your abilities to technology, you diminish your brain's ability to perform certain tasks. Okay, so just bear that in mind. When we started, writing, and by we I mean society at large, when society started writing, glorifying the written word, right? I've read anthropologists say things like, oh, well, societies that depended on oral history were uncivilized or savages or whatever bullshit word that they would use to sort of diminish them because they didn't have the written word. So scientists, anthropologists would use the fact that a culture having written word as a way to say, well, because essentially European culture is dependent on written word, they are superior to cultures that have an oral tradition, which, as we are all starting to realize, is, it's just white supremacy, light, at its finest, I should say. It's not going to be a racial thing, but I'm calling it, let's call it what it is, okay? So, but the thing is, cultures that had oral tradition, they would sit and memorize books, whole books. Like there are people who knew the Torah by head, right? There are people who knew the Quran by head, and you'd have to sit and you would memorize all of this stuff, stories that got passed down from generation to generation. They didn't write things down because they remembered everything, because their minds were capable. Now, ultimately, a marriage of the two would have worked, right? If they wrote things down and passed things on, just in case the people who, had the information, sort of like, back up the data, right? Like back it up. So a marriage of the two would work. But what I'm trying to get my mind to is, can I memorize? Not only just digest the information that's contained in a written word, but can I also, if you hear the squeaky noise, I'm not farting, I am moving around, my chair squeaky. Can I also retrain my brain to memorize things? Right? I mean, the brain has the capability of doing so. People tens of thousands of years ago did this. Right? We call ourselves civilized, right? And evolved. So why can't I? So now when I read 4 or 5 times the same book, sometimes the same chapter over and over again. And then when I listen, I also will listen to like specific phrases and try to memorize the phrases. Because my goal is to memorize my books. Just so I can. So they become a part of me. I'm reminded of the book The Wrinkle in Time, or A Wrinkle in Time, rather. There was a character whose name I'm not going to remember right now, but she was played by Mandy. Is it Mandy Kellig? I'm destroying her name. I apologize. In the movie, Mindy Kellig. Apologize. But I'm saying because I think I destroyed her name, but And she could only speak using other people's words, right? But she got the information through, right? And I there's something about that I thought was interesting, because that is sort of how we are, right? We, even the whole sort of premise of language, right? You didn't invent language. Certain words that we use were invented by other cultures and obviously people, right? And then collectively agreed upon. And so now you're sort of speaking other words, in other words, right, of other people. So sometimes too, I'm always tickled when I hear like certain phrases that I've like never heard before. Like the other day, my daughter was eating grapes and she was like, "These grapes are dusty." And I just laughed for like 5 minutes. And she's like, "What's so funny?" I was like, "I don't know. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say those particular words together in that way." And it just tickled me. And it stayed with me. So, but the idea of, collecting certain even sentences so that when these conversations come up where you need to communicate things to people, can you communicate ideas to people without really, like taking shortcuts, without having to, regenerate something that has been done really well, right? Like, so if an author took the time to sit, write, and edit, and then edit again, and then edit again, right? Something for a book, I'm going to take that, right? So that when it's time for me to go and sit and have a conversation with somebody, it's not just pulling just ideas, but even over time, perfected phrases to help another person sort of pass information along. So I'm not saying that you have to do this, but if you're interested in going on the journey with me, like, try it. Why not? I mean, why not? Yeah. So anyway, all of that is to say that, listen on other mediums, so you're not stuck to YouTube. But it's more important than when I start, to give the information, that you get the information. And see, I'm 12 minutes in. If you were listening on something else, I'm not saying don't subscribe to my YouTube. Please subscribe to my YouTube. But I'm saying if you were listening on like Spotify or whatever, 12 minutes, all right, have passed. We're at 12 minutes and 19 seconds now. It would have taken you like 6 minutes to get through. So it's almost like time jumping in a way. So I like to kind of play with things like that, because I'm weird. Okay, so this episode is going to be called Fractured Gods. And my attempt here is to reverse engineer the nature of our reality. Excuse me, I just burped. To begin to reverse engineer the nature of our reality. That is a formidable task. But I started reading a book called Why Materialism Is Baloney. And I read and reread it now, I think in the last couple of days, about 5 or 6 times, just because, the first time I read it, it's like, okay, interesting. By read, I meant listen to on Audible. The first time I listened to it, I said, okay, this is interesting. The second time, it was like, okay, this is interesting. And then the third time and the fourth time, it became familiar. All of a sudden, it became sort of part of me. And I was able to digest it. And in the book, he basically says that he subscribes to, there's a book called The Kabbalion that I've mentioned a few times. Small book, written thousands of years ago. Passed on, Egyptians and Greeks and Romans, and now we have it, right? It's esoteric writing, and in it says the all is mind, the universe is mental. So he's not really saying anything new, but he's saying it in a new way, right? But it's the same thing that has been said. It is an argument against materialism. So a materialist believed that, this world out there is something that we can't quite fathom, but our brains have, created pictures that allow us to perceive reality in a particular way. And but the reality that we are perceiving is not necessarily accurate, right? A great book for this is called, hold on, give me a second. Let me pull up the title. Hold on one second. Stay with me, guys. Stay with me. Okay, The Case Against Reality by Donald Hoffman. If you are interested in the sort of idea that everything we see is a sort of a false construct or an icon, check it out. But what the author of Why Materialism Is Baloney. He's basically challenging the materialist concept that, what we see is like Earth is real, right? But what we see of Earth is like essentially projections of our minds. And then when we die, right, that's it, right? So, but the world that is out there at large is not necessarily what we are seeing. It's just as a primate or a human being or Homo sapiens sapient, we have, quote, evolved to perceive it in particular ways. But, at the end of the day, once we die, that's it. Now, that is sort of a materialistic perspective. He's taking an idealist perspective. So think The World as Will and Idea by Schopenhauer, right? So he's taking the stance that not just Schopenhauer, but like I said, this has been something that has been echoed through time, that your brain, right? Your brain, your body, reality, everything is in your mind. Now, to take a very dense book and simplify it, because I had to listen to it. See, the thing about authors that I like, it's great. Like I'm grateful for the information, but they have a tendency, particularly with topics such as this, they have a tendency to take really sort of like complicated ideas and then make them more complicated. And the purpose of my podcast is to take really complicated ideas and simplify them. And so I remember the first reading of the book. And if you're wondering who the author is, I apologize. The author is Bernardo Kastrup. The one issue that I took with the author was that you're taking something super complicated and you're explaining it in ways, like, I think he felt that it was like simple to him. That's not a criticism, like he's brilliant. Obviously, he's a brilliant mind. But I think he felt like it was simple to him. But I'm listening to it and I'm thinking, like, how many people, though, that will happen across this and listen to this or read this will be able to understand what he's talking about? Because I can hear influences of like thousands of books, right, that have kind of led him to the construction of his narrative, right? But he's not projecting the information in a simple way. So I'm almost hesitant to recommend that book. There are other books that I've like spoken on that I'm like, man, I love this book. Please check it out. But I'm almost hesitant to recommend that book because it's like there were parts where he could have just been like, let's talk about this simply. But he didn't. He took it and made, almost in my opinion, made things even more complicated. Okay. So the idealist perspective is that all of this is happening in mind. Okay. So even when you open up somebody's brain, right, your brain is still in mind. Now, the most simple way to say that without really having it to be a 10-hour long book is to essentially say, start with this statement, start with the premise that, okay, this is all like a collective dream, which he even used the analogy of Inception. But before he got to the Inception analogy and this, collective dream analogy, he talked about knots, like the brains being knots. He talked about whirlpool, like the ego being whirlpools. And I'm just like, bro, like we don't need all this extra stuff. Like just stick with the basics. So I'm going to, if you want to read the book, check it out for yourself. You can let me know what you think. But I'm going to take 10 hours of this book and I'm going to condense it to simpler forms. Basically what he's saying is this, okay? Which is basically what I've been saying, by the way. Not patting myself on the back. A little bit I am. But what he's saying is this. Humanity, the human race, right, is just a small sort of fraction of a collective consciousness, a hive mind. Okay, so this is not new. And I don't know if it was just his way of trying to sound like he's saying something new. It's not. Okay, but I do like all the supporting stuff and all the different analogies and even random ideas that I hadn't thought of before. Okay, but that is having a collective dream. So all of this is happening in your mind. But that's what he said, is your mind. And I want you to take a step back, because saying this is happening in your mind is confusing, because then even in the book, he sort of refutes, solipsism. He's like, I'm not a, solipsist. So I'm not saying that everybody else is, not real, just a figment of your imagination. But then he follows up and says, but it is all happening in your mind. And what I want to take is that idea and remove your and replace it with a mind. A mind. Okay? A mind, not your mind, a mind. Okay? Simply put, there is a greater collective consciousness. You're familiar with that terminology. Okay? There's a greater collective consciousness. Okay? And it has the ability, that greater collective consciousness, let us call it God. Okay? Which he kind of danced around this, but I'm going to call it God. Okay? Whatever you want to, whatever, spiritual beliefs you're coming from or lack of, doesn't matter, but there is a consciousness. You can be an atheist and still be, a non-materialist and be aware that, okay, you do have consciousness, you do have awareness and ability to affect change or matter in this reality. There are quantum physics like experiments that basically says that consciousness affects matter. Okay, so I don't care if you're an atheist or not, you can't refute that fact that this is, this is lab tested, that consciousness affects the behavior of matter. Consciousness collapses, wave functions. Okay, so just accept that, okay, there's consciousness. Now, if you take that and you apply it to the collective, then we are all collectively collapsing wave functions. So our collective, like each and every single one of us, affects reality, right? By our awareness and our expectations. We affect change in this reality. So then you take all of us together and you call that a collective. That would be a sort of a hive mind influencing and co-creating what we know of as reality. Okay, now stay with me. If you're listening for the first time, like I said, I like to take complicated subjects and really break them down further and further and further until they are simple and easy to digest. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to do here. So you have a collective consciousness, all right, that one would call a God, right? And only a God in the sense of a creator of a reality. Okay, so that collective consciousness, what this book, what the Hindus, what the Buddhists, what even the Christians, what all these sort of theologies have argued is that collective consciousness dispersed itself into various forms, various bodies, right? Various avatars, various personas, various egos, right? Avatar being of a Hindu origin, a name for just your body. Ego being of a Buddhist origin, a name for just your body, right? And in the book, Why Materialism Is Baloney, he calls it, whirlpools, which is like just pattern of behavior. I don't like that analogy. I do keep bringing up the book because that is what inspired this episode. And like I said, I would love it if you read it. But maybe this episode will help you sort of form a greater understanding of what he talks about, just from a more simpler perspective. So you have a collective consciousness that decided, for whatever reason, to fracture itself into various forms. Okay? And those forms are you, me, ego, right? The face that you see when you look in a mirror. Okay, so fractured gods. Okay, now, is that the purpose of this episode? No, this is not new. I talk about this every single episode. The purpose of this episode is to say, okay, so what? So the fuck what? Okay, so at this point, if you're a regular listener, if you've done your research, if you are, conscious, awake, aware, spiritual, whatever, you kind of know this now. Right? You know that, consciousness cannot die. You know that the ego is a false construct. You know that your body is an avatar. And if you're not a spiritual person, you probably subscribe to The simulation hypothesis, you know that the Matrix, you know, this is a simulated reality, right? And you know that, you know, the person you see in the mirror is like in the movie The Matrix, right? Like Mr. Anderson, that's just a false construct of who he was, a projection tapped into a collective program, right? We're all saying the same thing, right? Collective program that each consciousness is co-creating. Now, of course, remove the whole we're being used for battery bits, and just focus on sort of that. So you know this. But the question, it begs the question, what the fuck for? What the fuck for? Because listen, okay, all of time is happening at once. Yeah? So if all of time is happening at once, then there is a time, and I'm using time loosely only because of limitations of language, right? But there is a time that's occurring right now when the collective is, or I should say was, right? So all of us were not fractured in this way, right? So that exists right now as a time. But now also we are collectively sort of fractured in different ways. And then eventually we will all sort of come back together. But that happens. That exists right now as well. And then all of these sort of incarnations that we're going through are all sort of happening right now. But it's just you are only aware of your sort of temporal location, right, in space-time. Right? You're just, that's what that is. Okay, so a great sort of quote directly from the book is, he says, let's see. I know I wrote this down somewhere. Where did I put it? Hold on, guys. The function of the brain is to localize consciousness, pinning it to the space-time reference point implied by the physical body. Right? The body is a localizing and modulating function according to the location of the body in space-time. When not subject to this localization organism, the mind is unbound. The brain is a filter or localization mechanism of consciousness. Okay? So, you see what I mean? Like the language, like I'm going to break it down and simplify it, but it's like, why are you saying all of that? I'm going to simplify it, basically. And that's kind of how the book is. Like, not a criticism. I'm just saying these are things that I'm like, if you can say things simpler so that people can get the information, then why don't you? Right? So basically what he's saying is there, okay? So you are, your consciousness, even as fractured as it is, you are still a conscious sort of entity, right? So imagine you have an ocean of consciousness, yeah? Okay. And then that ocean sort of has kind of dispersed into various like bodies or even drops. Okay. But each drop of the ocean still contains essentially the nature of the ocean, right? It's still salty. It has everything that has been sort of mixed into the ocean in that drop. Okay. And because your consciousness, like by its nature, is all knowing, right? Because everything that we are all collectively experiencing right now is essentially, for lack of a better phrasing, is being or has been uploaded into this hive mind. Yeah. So I'm trying to talk to everybody here. Okay. Has been uploaded onto this hive mind. So all your experiences, the data, all the information that you have learned, but people thousands of years ago have learned, and all of your past incarnations, everything that you've learned, from this sort of experience that we're having is all sort of uploaded every time you die. By death, I mean you leave the body. Like you just, okay, your time's up. You've learned what you needed to learn. Now you take your consciousness goes back to the collective. Right? And then you take that information and, okay, all of that has already happened, but it's also happening. If that's not confusing enough, it shouldn't be. Just think about it as just like, I like to think of it as, what's a good analogy? Like a pre-written movie okay? Or a choose your own, I use this analogy a lot rather, choose your own destiny sort of book, okay? So the story is already written. And then you are just sort of moving through, aware of the story now. But eventually when you leave the body, when your consciousness leaves the body, you will kind of go back and then you will be aware of everything again. Now, okay? Okay, so what is the point? What is the point? Why would, right? What is the point of all of this? Right? So, because I can sit here and I can tell you, as I've said before, okay, you're not going to die. There is no death. It's just the leaving of the body. But because all of time is happening at once, at any point in time, even when your physical body or the ego does experience death, you can, because consciousness is also all powerful, right? Especially in this realm, you can re-upload your consciousness into the beginning of your ego story, the beginning of your avatar's story, and have this experience all over again. Maybe make different choices. So even if you're like, okay, well, I'm consciousness, but I'm also attached to the ego and the avatar, doesn't matter, right? Because these are all pre-written characters, okay, in a way, with predetermined sort of outcomes. And you can go back and relive it in different ways. There's absolutely proof that this does happen. Listen to my previous episodes, because I talk about this repeatedly, and just at the risk of repeating myself to my regular listeners, you guys know what I'm talking about. Not to exclude you guys, but I'm just saying, like, just there is evidence of this. A good book, if you are interested in what I'm talking about, for new listeners, I guess, is called Labyrinth of Time by Anthony Peake, and Is There Life After Death? Those are two good books. So there's more, but I want to stay on topic here. So even if you experience physical death, that's not the end of you, right? So we know this at this point, or if you don't know this, just take it as a given that death is an illusion. Everything that appears to die doesn't really die, because how can it if all of time is happening at once and time is an illusion? How can it? Right? So everything really is an illusion. Okay, cool. So you experience death, you go up, you come back down. Either you reincarnate as the same body, or you decide to take on a different form, whatever, to learn different things. But why? Why? And because it's one thing, and I kind of read through some of my comments on TikTok where people are like, I think I put out a video where I talk about it feels like the world's, like we're heading towards an iceberg, and, we're not really taking steps to, adequately prepare ourselves to avoid whatever impending disaster it feels like we're heading towards as a society, as a species. I've had people come in the comments and they're like, well, it doesn't matter, because we're immortal anyway, and we are all consciousness and we are God. And I get that. But then don't go to work. You know what I mean? Like, it's a slippery slope. Like, if that's how you genuinely feel, then don't go to work. Or if you're like really willing to just throw your hands up and embrace, what you feel is an inevitability, then, just leave the game. Tongue in cheek here, right? But take yourself out. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying, then why not? So clearly on some level, you're saying things, so almost in a way of you're trying to kind of convince yourself that it's going to be okay, so don't do anything. But I've lived long enough, and I've watched things happen, so much synchronicity, so much, quote, coincidence, that have happened in my life, that I realize, okay, this is this is clearly planned. There's this reality itself is obviously an intelligence, is intelligent. And if we're arguing that all is mind, then clearly mind is intelligence. And more importantly, collectively, God. Okay? But if you're walking and you're saying, okay, we are God, okay, cool. Then what do you do with that information? And what is the purpose of this? I'm tempted to bring up the book, God's Debris. Can't remember the author's name right now, but you can, if you Google it, it'll pop up. And he basically theorized, it was a thought experiment, but he basically theorized that, an all-knowing, all-powerful God, decided he wanted to sort of live, he or she, wanted to sort of to sort of know what it would be like to not know, right? And so it fractured itself into what we have now, and then eventually, like, the debris, pulls itself back together again to reform, an omnipotent, all-powerful God. But the argument here is that, well, that's already happened if time is an illusion. So once again, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point? What's the point? And so I'm not going to come out right and say I know 100% what the point is. All I can do is pause and really slow things down and separate certain thought processes, and then give you my opinion on as to what I think is going on here. Okay? So first things first. We live in a society, right, that tends to congratulate, appreciate, glorify individuals who, on some level, whether we're cognizant of it or not, or conscious of it or not, live in ways that it is apparent that on some level they know that this is an illusion, that this isn't quite reality. Right? What I mean by that is, like, for example, let's just start base level artists. Most artists, the very creative ones that are sort of glorified at the very least, they create such great works. But they all say the same thing. I'm not the one creating this. I'm essentially acting as a vessel and allowing this sort of data, this information, these images to come through me. Okay? Now, back to the book. What he says in the book is that the mind, when it's diminished, the brain rather, when it's diminished or limited, human beings show sort of greater, quote, cognitive abilities. For example, people who have their brains have been damaged in some way, are able to create beautiful music and beautiful works of art. Obviously, they're not damaging their brains intentionally, but as a result of their damage, they've seen that you would think that if a person's brain has been sort of, harmed, they would actually show less cognitive ability, but that's not always the case, right? And he gives great examples of that, which is why I kind of recommend the book, just with the understanding that, sometimes he's a bit flowery with words that he doesn't need to be. So just giving you a heads up. And then in cases, for example, of near-death experiences that people will recall, or fear-death experiences as well, which is when you feel like you're afraid that you're going to die. You don't actually have a death experience, but you're afraid, and you have the same experience that it has been sort of reported by people who have near-death experiences. You see the tunnel, you see entities telling you it's not your time, it feels super surreal in a different world, whatever. So these things happen. But people who've had near-death experiences when their brains have zero function, he talks about how and they come back and they recount their stories, and doctors say, well, it's not possible for you to remember this, you were brain dead. And the patients say, okay, you can tell me what's not possible, but this is what happened. And they have been materialists that have said, okay, well, there is a part of your brain that must kick in after your actual brain has shut down to allow you to have these rich sort of vivid experiences. The author argues that then what's the point of having such, expensive brains, essentially, if a very small function of or a very small part of your brain can perform such an amazing function. But at the end of the day, what he's saying is that the brain acts to limit consciousness, right? So what that tells me is that when consciousness descends into ego, into form, it is doing so with the express intent and purpose of limiting itself to a specific pattern of behavior. Okay? And the question there is why? right? We are all gods. We are all part of, we are capable of, even they say, for example, you can visualize yourself working out, right? And when you visualize something, your physical body becomes sort of more capable of doing it, right? So on days that I can't paint, I don't have time to paint. Rather, I sit and I visualize myself painting. And then when I come back to paint, I actually get that much better. If that doesn't tell you that this is all mind that is affecting matter, and not the other way around, like, I don't know what to tell you, but this does happen. And more they're starting to, when you have books, for example, like Neville Goddard in his writings, and he says, what you focus on, what you think of kind of comes to pass, right? So we all know this, mind over matter. It's now becoming more and more mainstream. But that should tell you that it's not the brain that's producing matter. It's not the brain that's producing consciousness. It's actually consciousness that is affecting the brain and the mind and subsequently reality. And what the brain acts as is a reducing valve. He says filter, I say reducing valve. It takes the vastness, the omnipotence of who you really are. Even if you're a fragment, a fragmented God, right, or a fragment of a God, you're still a godly being, right? And it takes what you really are and all the things that you're capable of and reduces it to essentially what we call a mortal, so that we can have these sort of experience. And the question is, why? Right? It's not enough to say, okay, we're all God. The question is, why? And I mentioned God's debris, right? So, okay, let's see what happens. But I'm now tempted to pull in my own hypothesis. My own hypothesis is that, it's a game. I talk about this sort of at great lengths in my other podcast, the 15-episode anthology. It's called The Dark Oracle's Guide to the Multiverse. And I essentially say, like, it's a game. Right, and I break it down. And that podcast is more of like a guidebook to our reality, so to speak. It's just to wake you up to realize, okay, it's a false construct. And I provide, each episode is a step-by-step sort of easing into that ideology. So if you're interested, feel free to check it out. But people who say this world is a prison, it doesn't make any sense. How can you imprison a God? Right? How can you imprison gods? Why would that even happen? And more importantly, the stories that happen, that people recall during their near-death experiences, they are encountering other sort of similar entities that do say, it's not your time yet, go back. Okay? And it seems like they sort of need you to to agree and to go in. To go back in for whatever reason. I don't presume to know why they do that. I have thought about it. I have done episodes on it where I think it's kind of bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, if it's not my time, then why am I dead? Kind of thing. So I kind of wonder what the true nature of those entities are. And I'm pressed. When pressed, rather, I would feel like they're just like us and they're gatekeeping something else for whatever reason. But should these entities be individuals that we sort of praise and worship and venerate? I don't think so. So that I've talked about this on previous episodes. You can scroll through the titles and you'll figure out which ones. I think it's like karma, the trap of reincarnation and all that. So that's that. But I don't think that those are actually gods, and I don't think they're actually angels. They honestly could just be another level of the simulation, or gatekeepers of another level of the simulation that just need you to do certain things that perhaps may not make sense to you, but because this is all part of like a connected drama or game, you just have it's like a domino piece, and you maybe something happened, a glitch happened where you die before your turn. And there's a piece that you need to sort of flip over before you're able to then go. And that's it. Which then tells me that it's not quite as infallible and perfect as we would think, it should be. Which also tells me that perfection then is just bullshit. Like, nothing is perfect, obviously. But like literally thinking deeply about what that means. Like, nothing is perfect. Not even the gods. And if you're a God, then not even you, right? So I guess the projection of perfection needs to be sort of scaled back a bit and really approaching this from a very logical perspective. Why here? Why this kind of world? And I've speculated before, what kind of world, what kind of entities, right? So we're a consciousness, right? And we don't die. Cool. Why would we then create a reality where you do die? And why would your memory be wiped? Now, there are people who look at it and go, well, our memory is wiped because this is a prison. And I'm like, nah, I don't accept that. Why do I passionately reject that this is a prison? I guess mostly because I don't see why I would have done anything wrong. Why are you punishing people? How is this a punishment? You know what I mean? In a way, it doesn't feel like that. Regardless of all the crazy things that happen in this world and all the pain and suffering. Look, I'm not ignorant to the fact that there's immense pain and suffering. We suffer every day. This world is pain, right? Like, just think about how fucked up it is. Like my last episode, which if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, please do. One of the most important episodes I've done on this podcast by far, mind-changing. But you think about the fact that, like, legit, this is a little dark, but like every person that you have a connection with and you fall in love with, you're going to lose or they're going to lose you. And the more people you love, right, the more people you will lose or you will essentially cause pain to if something were to happen to you, right? That's this world. It's like suffering and pain, right? And, most of the time, like, even if you're just living a day-to-day existence, like, that shit's fucking painful, because sometimes, like, there's just this, like I talked about in the previous episode, either you're carrying the trauma of past incarnations or you're carrying the trauma of, like, members of your family that you are emotionally entangled with on a quantum level to the point where you can experience PTSD symptoms of somebody else's trauma that you are genetically connected to. That's fucking heavy enough as it is. Okay, so I'm not to mention the famine, the hunger, the war, and all of that. Like I'm not under any illusion of the nature of this reality. That even if you are a person like, I don't know, Bezos or whatever, that's like insanely wealthy, and for some reason our society thinks that being able to hoard money means that you're now happy. I don't imagine that he's happy, and I don't imagine that he's pain-free, and he suffers, maybe in a different way than we do, but he will still suffer. That's just kind of the nature of this world, of this reality. The temptation there is, okay, because there's so much suffering, then this must be some kind of prison. But there are a lot of cultures that, for example, have prisons, technically like the Scandinavian countries, I should say specifically the Scandinavian countries where they don't suffer. They're just kind of isolated. I mean, not additional suffering to like living life. They're just isolated. They're not like barred up. They're just sort of removed from society. Google it. I don't remember what specific nation is known for this, but it is there. And even in the West, yes, there is like prison labor, obviously, that's fucked up, which is essentially just modern day slavery, right? They put these people in jail. They put people of color primarily in jail, and then companies and corporations profit off of their labor, right? So it's just 13th Amendment was not, never abolished slavery. So it's just a modern type of slavery. But besides that, it's not like a punishment, right? They're not nobody's in prison causing them pain beyond just like they're just removed from society and having to sort of live in a particular way. So to say that we're in a prison simply because we experience pain, suffering, and everything like that doesn't make any sense, because other people have said, oh, is this hell? How is it hell if you can go through life and actually experience like simple pleasures, right? Like I little things make me happy. Like I like a good deal on Macari. Like I'm weird like that. Like if I can get something, at a discount or whatever that's already on sale, I just get happy. I don't know why. I also like not buying brand new things and finding like things that, maybe it might be somebody else's, like they don't want it, but I value it. Like I've started to like get into the Vibram like 5-finger toe shoes, and I've got some really good deals off Mercari. I just like the way they look. They look cool. And I like being able to walk like we're supposed to walk, which is gripping your feet, as opposed to the thick like 1-inch, 2-inch soles that our shoes tend to have that largely disconnect you from the earth, from nature. But anyway, that's a whole another episode. But little things like that, like discovering kind of cool little things, like make me happy. The joy of family, even, yes, you will eventually lose them and vice versa. But, like the time that you do spend with them, the laughter and all of that, like that's beautiful and that's pleasurable, right? And just eating something really good, right? Looking forward to like I tend to fast, intermittent fasting, but then when I break my fast, that, brings me joy. Cuddling under like a really soft blanket, so these little things bring us joy. There's joy to be found everywhere, just as much as there's pain and suffering to be found too. So that's why I'm like, this isn't a fucking prison and it's not hell, because everything exists here, both pain and pleasure, right? It's dual. Okay, so why would immortal beings, that's the question, why would immortal beings subject themselves? See why I say you should speed it up? Because now we're 50 minutes in, but if you double it up, you're only 25 minutes in, and we're getting to the good part now. Why would immortal beings subject themselves to a mortal experience? And my response to that is because they're immortal beings. Okay? I have grappled with, I've chewed this, I've masticated on it for years, and I will always come back to this premise. Okay, you are God. Okay, even if you're a fragmented God, right? So that's what all these other sort of books want to try to teach you. Okay, you're God, you are God, you are God. Okay, cool. Well, but that's like saying, like, that's just the beginning, okay, of the story. Okay, so we have to sort of start building things up. Now, I do love how Why Materialism Is Baloney, how that book ended. The author did a phenomenal job of wrapping things up, and I feel like it actually got simpler as it got towards the end. Maybe you start with the last chapter first and then work your way back. What he said was materialism is a philosophy, it's an ideology of children. And at a certain point as a species, we are going to have to grow up, right? Because here's the thing. For a lot of people, existence is pain. Don't believe me? Go on my TikTok. Find the video called Casual Nihilism and just read through the comments. There are so many people that are essentially just like they want to die. It was like unnerving at first, but I learned a lot from it. There are so many people that are okay with like the world ending, okay with, so long as it means an end to like their daily routine or their life or whatever it is. And so long as it means that they don't die alone. So there's this underlying sort of current that people really aren't happy, particularly in the West. And I do realize that these were mostly Westerners that are commenting on this. And this has been something that people have said, since the 20th century, that people in the East have written about, that people in the West, because we are so materialistic, that's not enough that does not nourish your soul, right? The acquisition of sort of physical things is a sort of a false medicine, right? There's a hole in your heart. Remember I said that what do we tend to do in this society? We tend to raise people up, to venerate those who recognize on some level the true nature of our reality and can access and have greater access to the hive mind, right? They have sort of battled down their avatar, their ego, they've conquered their ego in a way. Not saying that they are ego-less, but they've conquered their ego in the sense of people who are successful, people who are hardworking, We respect that, right? People who are intelligent, people who are creative, right? People who are wise. We put all these kind of stupid labels on them, but ultimately all these people are just egos who have figured out ways, whether they're conscious of it or not, to tap into the collective consciousness and the information out there. Some have called it the Akashic Records, but to tap into that collective hive mind information, and pull that knowledge, pull that information into our reality, right? Those are the people we venerate, whether they're doing it consciously or not. We call those people talented. We call those people intelligent. They're not necessarily intelligent per se, right? They just have greater access to, for either their minds are damaged in a way, or their minds are, programmed in a way, their brains rather, not minds, their brains are configured in a way, either genetically or through hard work, or drugs. But their minds are configured in a way, their brains, for the sake of this conversation, their brains are configured in a way, because remember, the brain is a limiting valve, right? That limits consciousness, but their brains are either genetically structured in a way that allow less of that limiting ability, like even savants, right? Those people who maybe they can't function on day-to-day basis, but they can sit and like draw landscapes and like just by seeing it once, or you ask them questions and they give you the answer right away. Well, their minds are tapping into this like collective consciousness. And so even though they may not be, even like scientists, like if you read a lot of the biographies of people like Einstein, Newton, they're not really well functioning in the sense they're not quote normal. They have higher levels of intelligence, but all their intelligence is their ability to sort of, they're savants in a way. They're not socially or emotionally intelligent, but they are tapping into their minds or their brains, tap into that collective consciousness, and they're able to pull information, out of the Akashic Records or whatever into our reality, and they're venerated for it. But a lot of these guys, like I said, if you read their biographies, a lot of their inventions, revelations came to them in dreams, came to them out of, moments of intuitions, came to them in quote, eureka moments. A lot of them will admit, look, I didn't find this out. Like I dreamt this, or I didn't find this out. It just came to me, or I went for a walk and it just came to me. This keeps happening over and over again. And we assign them sort of reverence, like we venerate them. But ultimately all that's great. And I hate to do this, where you take something complex and you take a complex ability and you whittle it down. I'm going to take a drink of water. Right, but to say an intelligent person, for example, an intelligent person isn't really an intelligent person. It's just their brains are configured in a way that allows information from the collective, from the hive mind, the collective consciousness to seep in. That's it. So, for example, I had a friend message me. I call everybody my friend because we're all friends here. We're family. But message me, and he was like, I want to do a podcast with you, but I'm intimidated because you come off as so intelligent. And I was like, I'm not intelligent in the way that we have been told, taught to sort of glorify intelligence. All my brain does is I just have a greater access, right? It's called memory. But also intuition. But my intuition is literally what we call intuition. They're all just fucking labels. But what we call intuition is literally just your avatar, your ego's ability to pull information from the collective consciousness, pull information from the Akashic Records. That's all. And it's either the way my brain is functioning. Maybe I'm even brain damaged. I hit my head, right? So when people are always so intelligent, it's like, well, I did hit my head when I was a kid. Like I was dropped. I was like, I was getting a piggyback ride from a friend. We're going up the stairs and she like slipped and dropped me in the back of my head. And I had to go get stitches. But maybe there's a part of my brain that's just like has been altered in a way that now allows that, the filter has been damaged a little bit, right? And so it allows a lot of that information to come through. And we call that intelligence, and you want to sort of venerate a person or people, but it's just a luck of the draw. right? It's just the way their brain was altered, or how, genetically, their brains just kind of let information in. So there's less filtration happening with my mind than, say, the average person. Doesn't mean I'm better than, it's just this ego, this filter is just less restricted, okay? But just because it's less restricted doesn't mean that I am deserving of veneration or praise. But that does kind of lend itself to what I've been repeating. Remember I said I'm going to repeat. That's how I, get your brain to pay attention to what I'm saying. But there's ways to, get to the same point, right? In the book, I keep referencing the book, even though I have my issues with it. But like I said, I'm subtly trying to encourage you to listen to it. But I want that after you listen to this episode, it becomes easier to sort of digest. But in the book, he says, what we call our unconscious, right, is not necessarily unconscious. He says unconscious is actually like an illusion. The idea of things being unconscious is actually an illusion. He said all it is a shift of awareness. Okay, so a couple of episodes ago, I talked about the Wim Hof method. And if you don't know who Wim Hof is, he is a Scandinavian who has figured out a way to essentially control his heart, control his body, to the point where he can consciously even like remove, for lack of a better phrasing, I don't even know, but remove like viruses and bacteria from his body. And also he can sit in like ice for long periods of time and not, be hypothermia, not catch or develop hypothermia. Amazing things. He's on YouTube, search for him. But he's doing things consciously that a lot of our bodies do unconsciously. And he has said, I'm not like a superhuman. A lot of the things that I do, you are capable of doing it too. It's just, awareness. Now, in the book, I hate the title, Why Materialism Is Baloney. He says more or less the same thing, just in a different way. He says, look, things that we consider unconscious, like unconscious processes are things that you just haven't figured out a way to shift your awareness to, okay? And so the example he gives is like, so say you're driving, and then like you kind of disappear for a minute. You're driving, but your mind shifts. And then next thing you know, you kind of come back, and now you're at home and you don't even remember how you got home. He says that clearly you were conscious on some level. That's the key. It's not that you're unconscious. He says unconscious, the idea of being unconscious is an illusion. You are conscious on some level. You just aren't aware of that. It's just essentially you wanted to focus on something, so you shifted your focus on something else. Your consciousness, who you are, right? Your true self is capable of doing all of these things without you having to be that focused on it. So he's saying that's actually a function of consciousness, being able to control your heart rate, slow your heart rate down, change the temperature of your body. These are things that you should be able to do. And perhaps if we lived in a society that, first of all, let you know that you are capable of doing that, which we living in a shitty society that makes us think that we're just, things that are going to live and die and that's it, right? So consume. But that's not true, right? So if you found yourself in a society that not only like said that, look, this is all an illusion, right? This is all is mind. We are all fragments of a collective consciousness, and you can use mind to shape, influence, master, tame the ego, the body, the beast, or whatever in this reality. Yeah? And then that was taught from a childhood. Like, imagine the things that we would be, capable of, from ESP to, telekinesis, which for those of you, when I say these things, you raise an eyebrow, Google it. There are actually like CNN articles that talk about this, where there are people who do have ESP, who wake up speaking different languages. Like, this happens, okay? So we're clearly, those people, when they wake up, their brains are damaged in a way, right? And then something allows, because the filter is damaged, that ability to speak a different language kind of seeps in, right? And now they have this ability. I'm not saying go damage your fucking brains, guys. Like, don't, obviously. But it's not the other way around. It's the brain is what is limiting who we are. But you can change it without causing serious damage to it, and thus also making yourself a rudimentary individual. It's about focus, right? And conscious intent. So when you have like people who say, okay, meditate, right? Think about the energy that you waste on a daily basis thinking about bullshit that doesn't matter. Okay. And then think about what you could be doing with that energy instead. Like, and we live in a society that programs us to fixate on stupid bullshit, right? Like, oh, this person did something wrong. Let's judge this person, or all the things that we listen to in our minds on a daily basis. Imagine if you took that time, let's say like for the 12 hours or 18 hours that you're up, a day, you took that time, and even that you're thinking about what this person did to you, what that person did to you 20 fucking years ago. Yeah. Like, what's going on? When you're gonna have dinner, all this bullshit on chatter that you're focused on. Meanwhile, you have your unconscious kind of doing its thing and, running its immune system, your heart. Like, imagine you took that energy, and instead of focusing on what that person said to you, you focus on your breath and controlling your breath, which is what the Wim Hof method suggests. Or you take that energy, and instead of listening to another stupid thought, you listen to some books, right? And what does that do for you as an individual, right? Like, you start taking all of this wasted, dispersed energy and pulling it towards greater awareness, right? So once again, I'm repeating, you pull that energy that you have dispersed, right? You have concentrated energy, but you disperse it throughout the day. It's wasted 18 hours a day, and it's wasted thinking about what this person did to you, what happened 20 years ago, why you're mad at this, all that fucking wasted. And that's encouraged from birth. I wish we lived in a society where that is discouraged from birth and that you're taught to use that energy constructively. But that's why I did the episode before, because when you sit and you realize that the majority of people who are living their lives aren't even conscious of, they're quote unconscious, right? They're living through PTSD symptoms, not only of the shit that they've experienced, but also the collective experiences of their ancestors that they are genetically entangled with, not to mention their past traumas from past incarnations as well. Okay, all that's going on. Why waste 18 hours judging somebody who they're not even like aware of what they're doing? They're, not conscious, like they're unconscious in the traditional sense, right? Or their awareness is so fixated on like piddly things that they're not even aware enough to like be aware of the impact and effect that their behavior is having on you. Okay? Once again, their awareness is so dispersed throughout the day that if that person that you're upset about, like really like if their awareness wasn't dispersed throughout bullshit that happened, not only that dealing with other people's past trauma that they're carrying and other people's past bullshit that they're carrying, but also the biggly things that kind of they go through, they would behave better. But we're all kind of in this collective sort of dream within a dream, right? Of just like piddly things that you're wasting your time thinking about something that they did while they were wasting their time thinking about something somebody else did, all the while being influenced by the PTSD symptoms, anxiety, depression, and all that brought on by other people's past experiences. They can't even kind of waddle past that. So it's like a fucking like Russian doll. It's like a dream within a dream with Inception, right? Leave it. That's a waste of time, and it's a waste of energy. They're sleepwalking. I just finished In Search of the Miraculous. This is like the second time I'm reading that book. I'm going to go back and reread it again. Not that I agree with everything that Gurdjieff and Uzbensky, those are the authors, more or less, came to, but it's worth revisiting because he talks about Gurdjieff and, by extension, Uzbensky. He talks about the fact that most people are sleepwalking, and most people that we think is just one individual, like, Jolie, right, is actually comprised of many eyes. And I'm going to add to that. I would add to that not just your many eyes of different wants, desires, from one present reality, right? In one present incarnation, who you are, your ego, your avatar now, but also bullshit that you're entangled with, from other people's experience as well, that's kind of weighing in and blinding you. You're sleeping. A lot of people sleep. So now imagine you took all of that energy that's wasted. It's just wasted. You don't need it. It doesn't serve anything. Thinking about what happened, why? Think about what they did, why? And you took that and you decided to focus on living more lucidly, right? Becoming more aware. Most importantly, and I kind of hinted this on my TikToks, but I guess it's a little esoteric. Most importantly, altering the brain in a way through meditation, through focus exercises or breathing exercises, whatever, altering the brain in a way to allow for more of the information of the collective consciousness to pull through, of the Akashic record to come through into this reality. And then altering it, essentially becoming a god in this reality. And I think that that's the nature of the game. How many incarnations can you come through to the point where you can bring your abilities as a god, some of it, into this reality? I think that's the challenge. I think that's one of the sort of the aspects of the game, because that is one of the things that are more or less encouraged, right? Can you, when you sit, okay, I'm going to paint, I'm a painter, right? I used to try to paint, and I realized lately that I'm not the one doing this. So remove that energy, that's wasted energy of trying to paint, just paint, and understand that the images that I want to sit and paint already exist. And essentially I'm just like sitting here, allowing the energy to flow through this avatar to, quote, create a painting, quote, actualize a painting. That's it. I think about The Sims. I've used this analogy before. When you download The Sims and you choose a character and an avatar, so you give it the title of artist. When you set your artist sim to paint, those images are already contained within the game. Those images are already contained within the game. The avatar, the computer program that looks like your sim, isn't the one that's actually painting. So you just trust that when you hit click and paint, it's going to create something cool. And it does. So that's been my same approach. And you can see the difference between when I used to try to paint and when I just sit and paint. And it's the same thing when you watch athletes. They all say the same thing. And they perform, quote, superhuman feats, right? But they're conquering the filter. Right? Can you alter the filter? That is what is sort of what people really venerate in this society. Those who figured out ways to alter the filter, rise above the filter, right? Conquer the filter. I don't like conquer because it's got a negative connotation, but that's the challenge, right? It's you are your greatest, quote, enemy. But the ego, I don't like that, the ego is enemy because it's combative, but that is the nature of the game. Right? So you imagine this. Imagine an immortal. This is the game. I'm telling you right now. This is what I believe the game is, or I think the game is. You take immortal consciousness, right? Non-corporeal beings, non-corporeal entities, and you put them into a world, and you wipe away sort of their memory of what they really are. Yeah? And then see if they can overcome the limiting, binds. Like, think Houdini. You know how Houdini he would get wrapped up? He would he would bind himself, right? And then he'd put in them something like in the ocean or something like nefarious, right? And then his goal, the reason why he was sort of venerated, was that he got out of the binds and made himself free. And I'm saying that that's what this world is. And the ocean in itself is our reality, right? And then the bind is the avatar, the ego, and the memory. And then you come through, and it's not just you, right? It's all a collective. It's all intertwined. It's all together. And that's another reason why, because I was like, why is it that as much, I don't care how introverted you are, at the end of the day, you can be like, oh, I'm introverted. But at the end of the day, if I take you and I put you in solitary confinement, you'll go crazy because you're not meant to be away from people. So it is what it is. But And I think that's the nature of the game, is that everything has to be connected for whatever reason. And it's just sort of a self-modulating game. So it's like a domino, right? It needs one thing to affect the other, and the other. Same reason why you can go to sleep. It's all self-modulating. Or not that you can't go to sleep. Same reason why you can't go without sleep for long periods of time. It's part of the game. You need to back up that data into the collective consciousness, into the hive mind or whatever. So it's all part of the game, and it's already been done, but it also is happening now. I think that's the nature of the game. Now, somebody sent me a message. I think his name was Dennis, just reached out to me. So I'm going to call my friend. But he was trying to encourage me to read a comic called The Invisibles, which I will read this weekend. And I think by Craig something or another. But I'm looking forward to it. But there was a quote that he sent to me that was from it. And I remember reading it thinking, like, this is the perfect piece for the podcast. It's funny. I used to try to, like, think, okay, what am I going to talk about on the podcast? But I realized, like, once again, it's the same thing with art. I don't have to sit and try to come up with things. When I sit, it will come out. And I just have to let it come out. Right. And when I'm ready to, and the information needs to come out, the information that needs to be said will come to me, and it happened. And that's how it happens. So here's a quote from The Invisibles that he sent to me. He said, here's a quote. Dennis Culver. Shout out to Dennis Culver for sending me this. Your head is like mine, like all of our heads, big enough to contain every god and devil there ever was. Bruh, think about that. Doesn't that just fit in beautifully with everything? Big enough to contain every god and devil there ever was. Big enough to hold the weight of oceans and the turning stars. That's the mind. That's the mind, right? The collective consciousness. Whole universes fit in there. But what do we choose to keep in this miraculous cabinet? Little broken things, sad trinkets that we play with over and over and over again. Remember I said we spent 18 hours, all the things that we could be capable of doing, manifesting, actualizing. We spent 18 hours of our day on bullshit, on what this person did, what this person said, what happened in the past, right? When you could be accessing the greater collective consciousness and pulling that down. Every god and devil there ever was the quote says in our heads, but I say in our minds. In our minds. The world turns our key and we play the same little tune again and again, and we think that tune's all we are. Brilliant. Perfect. Came this morning and I just was like, this is the cherry to the pie that I've been ruminating on the last couple of weeks or so, about a week and a half, as I was trying to think what am I going to talk about next? And here it is. So all of that I just spent the last, hour and some change talking about, builds up to that. You're greater than your ego. So back to the book. So why materialism is baloney. And towards the end, the author basically says this. He says, materialism is, and I'm paraphrasing here, actually, and I'm just rewording what he said. Materialism is a pacifier for our minds. We think that because if you believe that you are materialist and that this is all there is, and once your brain dies, that's it. And you find a lot of intellectuals believe this because of just the nature of our society, right? We don't encourage philosophy. We encourage science, but science has become a dogma and is dead without philosophy. The greatest scientists knew this. The greatest scientists, there's a book by Alan Lightman. So I know you guys are probably tired of me throwing books at you guys. But the book is called, hold on, gotta find it. A Sense of the Mysterious. And he talked about how he's a physicist. And he talked about how a lot of these great revelations came to physicists by them like not thinking and allowing the information to flow through. Exactly what I've been saying. But we venerate thinking, but thinking is a sort of force. It's like trying. Thinking is like trying, right? It's like me trying to paint as opposed to just painting. It's like me trying to come up with a solution as opposed to just letting the solution flow. Go with the flow, let it in. But what he said, not Lightman, the author of Why Materialism Is Baloney, he said is that, we venerate materialist perspective and intellectualism, but it's like dead on arrival. It doesn't mean anything, right? It's the reason why our society is the way it is. It's the reason why our oceans are burning, and our forests are, getting, devastated, right? And our water being overfished because we think that this is all there is. And he said, it's a nice security blanket, right? Remember what I said in the comments of that video, Casual Nihilism? People were just like, yeah, they're ready for it to come. And some people they think that shit is going to be over. It's not, right? I have a phrase that I've said a few times, like good news and bad news. The good news is that you're immortal. The bad news is that you're going to live forever. Okay, you're immortal. Okay, you're a fractured consciousness, right? That's living within ego. Then now what? Okay, materialism is a security blanket. Whether or not you want to believe it or accept it, it's a security blanket and it's a false narrative. It tells people that when they die, that's it. But it's not true. It's absolutely not true. And it's not provable. It's not testable. It's not falsifiable. It's not true. Okay, but a lot of intellectuals believe it as it's true, but it's not. But if you're sort of walking around thinking, okay, I'm gonna live however I want, because when I die, that's it. And then when you die, that's not it. What have you done? It's not only just that. Not only what have you done, it's that how does that prepare you in any way, shape, or form to believe a false narrative when there are countless people who keep coming and saying this is not it, this isn't all there is, there's something outside of this one, another variation, another type of reality, but there's something outside of this one. You need to, just knowing that you don't die is like base level stuff. Accept it, right? Accept it. It's base level stuff. You don't die. Cool. Accept it. I know that's hard for a lot of people to accept because of the way we've been conditioned, but you don't die. You don't. You go on. Consciousness goes on. It doesn't die. Okay, now what? Because thinking you're just going to live your 70 years or 80 years and that's it it might help you feel better, might help you get through life, might help you be like, okay, eventually I get to just shut my eyes and fade into nothingness, but then this world wouldn't be, right? So the people who constructed this world, right, with the amnesia and the forgetfulness and things of that nature, they did it for a reason, right? Not saying that it's a good reason, but they did it for a reason because there's a part of that society, of this, collective of non-corporeal entities, like immortal non-corporeal entities that they do need that amnesia, even if it's for a fleeting moment of feeling like for 70 years, right, to an immortal, 70 years, 85 years to an immortal, that fleeting sense of, okay, like once I'm done, that's it. Okay, cool. Like it's great for the 70 years, but it's like a drug. Eventually you're going to wake up and you're going to look around and be like, fuck, okay. Okay, there's more to this. Now what? So it's best to prepare now. It's one of my favorite quotes. To study philosophy is to die before you die and then find out there is no death, right? Die before you die is die to the ego. Realize that the ego is just a construct. It's an avatar. It's just, what it is. And then to essentially, quote, kill the ego in the sense of what happens when you leave the body, right? You become aware of the fact that the body isn't all there is. So the only thing that can die is form, and not even that, because all the time is happening at once, right? So die before you die. What happens when you die? You leave the body and realize, oh, okay, well, there's more to this. So knowing to die before you die is knowing that you can't die. That's to die before you die. And then knowing that there is no death. Then you study philosophy, right? So then what? We stop there. Then what? Right? So then you start to play the game. Right? You start pulling all that sort of wasted energy that's spent on like little things, like the quote said, little piddly things. Right? All these things that you're capable of. Sad trinkets that we play with over and over again. Little broken things. Right? People stuck in their past. I'd asked a friend to listen to It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin, because they were holding on to sort of like pain and animosity towards a situation that happened to them when they were like 10 years old. They felt that their parents should have protected them from and didn't. And now they're like old, like not older, but they're proper old. Like it's been like decades later. And I'm like, you need to read this book to understand why mother might have done something, or why your father might have done that thing, so that you can let go, so that just for your sake. And their response was, no, this thing happened and I'm not going to let go of it. And I'm like, okay, cool. It's not my place to force you to let go of it. If you want to play with this broken little thing, to use the phrase, and it is what it is. And it's not a damnation towards them, but gosh, why play with broken things when you're capable of so much more? And I think that that's the, until you sort of learn to let that go, you will get stuck in a particular level. Like literally, it's just the nature. We call it karma, but that's what it is. It's just nature of what the entire reality is. It's like dreams within dreams, within dreams, within dreams, right? It goes on forever. Unfortunately, I apologize, but it is what it is. But you let go of these little things that most people are kind of preoccupied with, and then you go next. And that's where you escape at least this place, right? Because then you learn to become more aware. And then the next place, and I'm going to dance around this, but the next place you get an ego. But now you've mastered the ego. You get a different ego. You get a different avatar. I got another sort of message from a friend I thought was perfect. And I told that friend, thank you for providing the piece, the puzzle for this episode. And it was like, it was a meeting of Pleiadians. That I don't know if I screenshotted she had received a brochure, or like a flyer. Let's say flyer. It's like an emailed flyer. And the flyer said, let me see if I can pull it up. So here's the flyer. It says, she said she got this email today and she thought of me, so she sent it to me. It said, Introduction to Multidimensional Beings, presented by Barbara. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to say their name. Just leave it at that. But it's a Psyche medium and Reiki master. And here's what the flyer said. Have you ever wondered if we are alone in the universe, or if we have friends, seen and unseen, with us to help whenever we ask? Or do you sometimes wonder if your home is someplace other than planet Earth? Then join us for this 2-hour workshop for a meet and greet introduction to some of our favorite friends, Lemurians, Atlanteans, Golden Ones, Actuarians, Pleiadians. Okay? And blah, blah, blah. So it's happening whenever it's happening. And my first sort of intuitive response was, I don't, and I not like, obviously this is me paraphrasing. I didn't respond in this much of a dickish way, but the overall consensus was, who fucking cares? Like, who cares if you were a Pleiadian? Who cares if you were a Lemurian? You are a human now. You are in a human incarnation now. Who cares? Who cares if you're a Martian? Who cares if you're a Venusian? Who cares if you're a fucking mermaid? Who cares if you're a reptilian? You are in a human incarnation now. Those things don't deserve veneration. Those things don't deserve venerations, because at the end of the day, they're just egos. It's just a different form. It's like saying, do you feel connected to dogs? Well, let's talk about dogs and cats and tigers and whales. Who fucking cares? At the end of the day, you are consciousness that has probably embodied all these different forms, but you're human now for whatever reason. You're human now for whatever reason. So I'd like to focus on what I'm supposed to be in this incarnation. Like in previous episodes, I've talked about even like who I feel like I've incarnated as, or who I was in past incarnations, right? But ultimately, I don't like linger. I don't like look at that, because once again, to me, that's a broken little thing that you play with. You're looking backwards. Let's look at what I'm supposed to be doing now, right? Can I pull the information from that and access it and let go of the ego and tame the ego, right? That's my daily practice, monitoring the ego, right? I woke up super petty today, like the ego, I should say, woke up super petty today. And I allowed myself to feel the emotions of the ego, the pettiness, and then I let it go, because I don't subscribe to toxic person positivity. There's people who are just like, oh no, you have to be like positive all the time. Why? This world isn't positive all the time. And if this is a collective consciousness that's manifesting everything, right, then there obviously are some dark parts to this, hive mind that manifests negativity. That's part of the experience, right? So to suppress it, right, that which you, what is the word? That which you, it's a phrase I like ruminate, that which you resist persists. There we go. So the feeling of like, I was like super judgmental, but somebody kind of irked me or whatever. And I thought like, I was kind of morally sort of like, felt like, okay, should I really be feeling this way right now? and challenging that. But then I was like, fuck it. Yeah, well, that should I or should I not? I don't control it, right? This is how the ego decided to feel today. Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm going to observe it. And I allowed the ego to feel how it felt. And then I think a friend of mine was like, how are you doing? And I was like, I'm a little annoyed. And then the feeling passed. And then I let it go. Okay, but I'm not going to like spend the whole day on it. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to let the ego sort of do its thing. But the idea here is, can you master the ego? In all different ways, right? Can you master the ego? That is the nature of this reality. That's what I think it is, right? Right? You take a god and you confine it like Houdini. You take a god and you confine it in the ego. And then can you first remember, what is this place? First remember, okay, this is a simulation. Then, or it's a dream, or it's whatever you want to call it, right? But all of this is happening in mind, in our collective mind. And we're all connected, right? And we're not really in control of anything because it's already been done, right? And yes, there are a myriad of multiple realities existing at once, and my consciousness can be aware of at any given time or can actualize. But still, there's limited things that you do control, if anything. So if I wake up feeling some type of way, then I wake up feeling some type of way, and that's just it. You know what I mean? And then what do you do from there? Okay, cool. Can you tame it? Because I do believe, and I've said this before, and I keep coming back to it because it's important. I do believe that is why you're here. It is a school, not a prison. It's a school. It's a training school. If you can master the ego, break free like Houdini, break free like Houdini. I feel like I should write that down. Then after this, it's going to take a couple tries. And the reason why I probably am able to say this stuff is because God knows how many times I've done this, practiced this. You know, it's like that Twilight Zone episode I referenced, last year sometime. There was an episode, I don't remember the name, but this guy, he was in a nightmare. He just kept having the same nightmare over and over again. And different people's faces, they took on different roles, but the faces were the same, but they would just one person would be like a judge the one night, and then they would be like their best friend the other night or whatever. And I was like, shit, this is life. Right? And then he just kept trying to change something and wake up and realize, okay, this is a dream. Well, the reason why everything feels so familiar is not because it's happening right now. It's because it's happened already and I'm remembering it. And the only reason why I'm able to remember it, right? Like intelligence, what I said to my friend who said, I'm intimidated. I feel like you're more intelligent. I don't know if I want to do this podcast with you. And I'm just like, I just remember. I just have a better memory. And the reason why I have a better memory is, what did I say at the beginning of this episode? I just be repeating shit. I repeat shit because that's how you remember. So don't elevate me. And I would take it a step further, don't elevate others who seem like they know everything. The only reason why they know some things is because they've been exposed to the same sort of shit over and over again. That's it. They're just remembering. So I've lived this life over and over again. Maybe you haven't lived it as much, or this particular incarnation as much, so I can remember things. Things come to me. I seem to be able to predict things. Things seem to kind of come to me out of turn. But it's memory. That's intelligence. That's all it is. It's just memory. That's it. That's it. So can you strengthen your memory and then do something with it? Harness that. Right? And with remembering, okay, this is just it's a false construct, and the avatar is just, it's like a bind. The ego is just a bind. It's not really who I am, right? And I am God. I am a collective consciousness. Cool. Now, how do I start affecting change in this reality? It's like lucid dreaming, and I think that's the goal. I think that's the goal of this game. Not a prison, it's like a school in a way, but obviously everything is a school. Like a video game is a school, like you're learning something, right? But beyond form. Right? Letting things through and bringing things into. Because essentially, right, if we are fragmented consciousness, eventually what you want to do is make it unison, right? To unite it, bring it back together. And so when people say, we're all one, and that they're pushing that narrative, if you can pull from the collective consciousness into this construct, that's bringing it together. That is making it all one. So anything that unifies, it brings it creates a cohesiveness. Right? That's venerated, right? That's the purpose. That's the purpose. Listen to this a couple of times. Expose your mind to it. Expose your mind to it. Not this. My podcast is not the kind of podcast where you listen to it once and then you go, okay, I get it. Every time you listen to it, you're going to get something out of it. Listen to the episodes over and over again. I listen to my own episodes because even when I sit and talk, a lot of the times I'm just like, I don't know where I'm going to go. And then I get there and I'm like, yes. And then I have to go back and re-listen to it and revisit it so that it becomes ingrained in my psyche. So I remember. Memory here is key. Memory here is key. All right. Catch you guys next week.